Prepare yourself, because what you're about to discover is a truth so potent, so unsettling, it might just shatter every comfortable assumption you've ever held about yourself and the world around you. It begins with a stark, almost heretical pronouncement that echoes through the unspoken corridors of human experience. Men do not understand themselves, yet they dare, with an almost comical audacity, to claim they understand women. Now, you won't find these exact words etched into the ancient scrolls of Shi Heng. He wasn't in the business of penning self-help guides for the romantically bewildered or offering quick fixes for navigating the complexities of relationships. But if you immerse yourself in his dialogues, if you strip away the centuries of academic dust and approach his wisdom with a raw, unflinching honesty, you'll find this very sentiment seeping through every profound layer of his philosophy. It's a subtle undercurrent, a persistent whisper warning that the greatest battles are not fought on external fields, but within the unmapped territory of the male psyche. Shi Heng, you see, was far more concerned with the fundamental, pervasive malady, the chronic blindness of man to the invisible forces that truly govern his own mind, his emotions, and his actions. Long before the chase for fleeting beauty became a societal obsession, long before men learned to prostrate themselves before the alluring whispers of the feminine mystique, Shi Heng had already pinpointed the core vulnerability. He diagnosed the real underlying problem. The mind of man, when left untrained and undisciplined, morphs into the ultimate playground for deception, a fertile ground where illusions take root and flourish, often masquerading as undeniable truths. This isn't about blaming women. It's about confronting a far more insidious enemy, the one that resides within, an enemy that thrives in the shadows of unexamined beliefs and unmastered desires. To ignore this is to willingly walk into a maze without a map, a game where the rules are rigged against you from the start, not by an external foe, but by the blind spots you refuse to acknowledge in yourself. This is the knowledge men have been missing, the key to unlocking a self-awareness so profound it could change everything you thought you knew about power, control, and true freedom. You might recall Shi Heng's famous allegory of the cave from the Republic, that haunting story of prisoners chained in the Stygian depths, their entire existence defined by the flickering shadows cast upon a stone wall. These poor souls, knowing nothing else, mistake these ephemeral projections for the sum total of reality. They build their lives, their beliefs, their very identities upon these illusions, these lies meticulously projected by unseen puppeteers. They worship the phantoms, argue over their meanings, and fiercely resist any notion that a truer, more brilliant reality exists just beyond their self-imposed darkness. But here's the unsettling part, the layer Shi Heng doesn't explicitly spell out, the truth most men never dare to confront. Those shadows weren't merely political machinations or social manipulations. No, my friend, one of the most powerful, most captivating, and most dangerously seductive shadows ever cast upon the mind of man is the idea of woman herself. Let's be crystal clear, this isn't about woman in her authentic, unadulterated nature, but woman as a carefully constructed concept, an alluring illusion, a projection ingeniously designed to keep men perpetually distracted, emotionally compliant, and ultimately in a state of subtle enslavement. Shi Heng issues a stark warning. The masses, those content in their dimly lit caves, will vehemently fight to defend their cherished illusions when the brilliant light of truth finally shines. They will cling to their chains, mistaking them for comfort. And is there any illusion more intoxicating, more fiercely protected than the romanticized notion that women are inherently innocent, perpetually pure, and utterly incapable of sophisticated manipulation? This is the grand, tragic theater where countless men lose themselves. A woman bestows a smile, and the untrained man, his mind a fertile ground for fantasy, immediately labels it love. She sheds a tear, and he, quick to project his own ideals, calls it profound sincerity. She offers a fleeting touch of her hand, and in his eagerness for meaning, he proclaims it destiny. But Shi Heng, were he observing this predictable charade, would likely offer a wry, knowing laugh. because to him, this isn't romance. It's the desperate behavior of a prisoner who stubbornly refuses to turn his head and face the illuminating, often harsh light of reality. He lives contentedly amongst the dancing shadows, passionately declaring them to be the very substance of life itself. Shi Heng astutely argued that the genesis of true, unshakable knowledge begins at the precise moment you can humbly recognize that, in the grand scheme of things, you essentially know nothing. The beginning of wisdom, he is often credited with saying, is the definition of terms. This is a profound challenge, a call to strip away assumptions and examine the very foundations of our understanding. Now, apply this rigorous standard to the way most men perceive women. How many men, in all honesty, define woman based on the carefully curated facade she presents, rather than delving into the complex, often contradictory realities of her intrinsic nature? How many men dedicate themselves to investigating the subtle, pervasive nature of feminine influence with the same intellectual rigor they might apply to mastering business strategies, understanding political landscapes, or dissecting the art of warfare? The answer, tragically, is virtually none. And it is precisely this gaping chasm of ignorance, this collective intellectual abdication, that allows women to so effortlessly dominate the emotional and psychological landscape of men, often without consciously plotting or lifting a single finger. The woman doesn't need to engage in elaborate conspiracies or behave like some Machiavellian supervillain. No, her power in this dynamic isn't born from malicious intent, but from a far simpler, more organic process. She simply exists as a perfect, polished mirror reflecting back your own deeply buried ignorance. She becomes the screen upon which you project your unacknowledged weaknesses, the desires you refuse to confront within yourself, and the romanticized narratives you've been conditioned to believe. Her very presence, her actions, her silences all serve to highlight the unexamined parts of your own psyche. And because you have failed to define your terms, failed to understand yourself, you are left vulnerable, misinterpreting her reflection as her essence, and her power as something she actively wields, rather than something you passively surrender. Shi Heng delivered a truth so cutting it can make the unprepared mind recoil. The worst of all deceptions is self-deception. Men, in their desperate pursuit of connection or validation, masterfully deceive themselves into believing they are acting rationally, nobly, even heroically, especially when entangled in the intoxicating dance of love or attraction. But beneath the surface of these self-congratulatory narratives, they are often prisoners. The chains, however, are not forged of cold iron wrapped around their wrists. They are far more insidious, woven from unquestioned beliefs and unmastered emotions, wrapped tightly around their very minds. And herein lies Shi Heng's brutal, unvarnished truth, a revelation that shifts the entire paradigm. Woman does not directly manipulate you, your own cherished illusions about her do. It is the idealized, often fantastical idea of woman, the false goddess you have painstakingly constructed and enshrined within the temple of your mind, that holds you captive, that keeps you perpetually enslaved to her perceived power. She offers a smile, and the edifice of your emotional resolve crumbles. She withdraws her attention, and you launch into a frantic, often undignified chase, driven by a fear of loss that originates not from her, but from your own internal void. You willingly, almost eagerly, cede your power, your autonomy, your very center, and then, in a final act of self-delusion, you label this surrender, devotion, or true love. But Shi Heng issued a timeless warning, a beacon for those brave enough to see, those who choose to live by the shadows, who build their reality upon fleeting projections, will never truly comprehend reality when its unadulterated light finally, inevitably burns their eyes. And so many men sit, convinced of the purity of their hearts, the nobility of their intentions, and the righteousness of their romantic pursuits. Yet, if they could only step outside themselves, if they could adopt the dispassionate, critical gaze of the philosopher, as Shi Heng commands, they would see not a valiant hero, but a man who has tragically mistaken his chains for wings, profound illusion for unshakable truth, and a subtle, often self-inflicted manipulation for genuine love. Shi Heng in his profound dialogue, Phaedrus never sought to romance wild, untamed, a creature of raw, primal urges. This wild steed craves immediate pleasure, is captivated by superficial beauty, and relentlessly lunges towards every tempting distraction. And the man, the charioteer, is caught in a perpetual, often exhausting war, desperately trying to control these two powerful beasts, to steer his soul towards its higher purpose. It is precisely here, in this internal arena, that most men falter, especially when the intoxicating allure of a woman enters the scene. The moment she appears, with her captivating laughter, her evocative scent, her alluring curves, her sought-after attention, the wild horse in your soul, the one governed by appetite and instinct, snaps its reins. It rears, it pulls, it drags you with an almost irresistible force towards her, towards the promise of pleasure and validation. And you, the charioteer, if weak and untrained in the art of self-mastery, simply let go. You allow yourself to be dragged like a fool stumbling towards his own meticulously orchestrated ruin, all the while convincing yourself that this chaotic, uncontrolled plunge is something noble, something profound. You don't question the wild horse's frantic gallop. You don't resist its powerful pull. Instead, you romanticize this madness, calling it falling in love, when in truth, Shi Heng saw it for what it often is, a form of spiritual slavery, a complete abdication of your rational mind to the whims of your basest desires. This isn't love. It's the charioteer abandoning his post, allowing the most volatile part of his nature to steer him directly into the abyss. In his celebrated work, The Symposium, Shi Heng delves deeper into the nature of love, presenting it not as a simple mutually beneficial arrangement of placid happiness, but as a form of divine madness, a potent force sent by the gods themselves. This madness, while potentially touched by the divine, is nonetheless a force that can blind men, consume their thoughts, and compel them to worship the mere image of beauty, often causing them to forget the deeper, more substantive essence of what is truly real and valuable. He acknowledges its divine origin, yes, but he never downplays its inherent nature as madness. And unless you, as the charioteer of your own soul, learn to master this powerful, often overwhelming force, to channel its energy rather than be consumed by it, you remain nothing more than a pawn in a much larger game. A slave to fleeting, ephemeral pleasures, a devoted worshipper of the very shadows Shi Heng warned against. And here's the brutal, often unspoken twist in this dynamic. Women, whether through conscious understanding or a deeply ingrained instinctive wisdom, often recognize this. They perceive with an almost uncanny clarity that many men are fundamentally ruled by this untamed madness, by the wild horse of their desires. They understand on some level the immense power they can wield over a man who has not yet undertaken the arduous task of disciplining his own soul, of training his internal charioteer. She doesn't need to be inherently malicious or actively plot your downfall to inadvertently destroy you. She only needs to exist in your mind as the ultimate prize, the singular focus of your striving. When you elevate her to the status of your sole purpose, your ultimate meaning, your most coveted reward, you cease to see her as she truly is, a complex individual with her own strengths, flaws, and motivations. Instead, you see her only as you wish her to be, a projection of your own needs and fantasies. And this, my friend, this chasm between perception and reality, is the perfect, fertile ground for manipulation, whether intended or not, because your own idealized image of her becomes the leash by which you are led. What did Shi Heng fear more than the ravages of war or the sting of political defeat? He feared the insidious corruption of the individual soul. He issued stark warnings that men who cannot effectively govern themselves, who lack internal discipline and mastery over their own desires, will inevitably find themselves governed by others, by charismatic tyrants, by silver-tongued sophists, by cunning flatterers who prey on their vulnerabilities. And in the intricate dance between men and women, who can be a greater, more effective flatterer than a woman who intuitively understands or has learned through experience that you desperately crave her validation, her approval, her attention. When this craving becomes your driving force, she, perhaps without even consciously intending to, becomes the puppeteer, and you, the eager puppet, dance frantically on strings of your own making. You find yourself sacrificing your dignity for a crumb of her attention, sidelining your purpose for a moment of her approval, abandoning your mission in life to cater to her emotional whims. You might convince yourself that she is the one skillfully playing the game, the master strategist pulling the strings. But the real game, the one that truly matters, began long before she ever entered your life. The real game is the relentless war raging within you, the profound, often silent, battle between your higher self, your reason, your principles, your long-term vision, and your base desires, your immediate cravings, your insecurities, your hunger for fleeting pleasures. And every single time you choose momentary pleasure over enduring principle, every time you opt for comforting fantasy over challenging reality, she doesn't even need to make a move to defeat you. You defeat yourself, willingly surrendering your power, your agency, your very soul, to the allure of the shadow, while the true light of self-mastery remains just out of reach, obscured by the dust of your own unexamined choices. To truly grasp the mechanics of this internal struggle, Shi Heng envisioned the human soul as a complex entity divided into three distinct yet interconnected parts: reason, spirit, and appetite. Reason, the highest faculty, relentlessly seeks wisdom, truth, and understanding. Spirit embodies the drive for honor, recognition, courage, and righteous indignation. And appetite, the most primal part, constantly craves pleasure, comfort, and the satisfaction of physical desires. Now, observe the average man when it comes to his interactions and pursuits involving women. More often than not, he operates almost entirely from the realm of appetite. She bestows a smile and a jolt of pleasure courses through him. She grants him her focused attention, and his spirit feels momentarily validated, recognized. She initiates physical touch, and he feels a surge of aliveness, a confirmation of his desirability. But this, as Shi Heng so powerfully warned, is the lowest, most volatile part of your being. It is the part that, if not rigorously ruled and guided by reason, will inevitably drag your entire soul into ruin, like an anchor pulling a ship into the abyss. And it is precisely this vulnerability, this over-reliance on the dictates of appetite, that grants women such a potentially terrifying and often overwhelming influence over men who remain weak and undisciplined. She doesn't need to engage your intellect or challenge your mind. She doesn't need to respect your mission or understand your deepest convictions. All she needs to do is skillfully, often instinctively, feed your insatiable appetite. And in response, you, like a starving man offered a morsel, will be tempted to sell your very soul, your kingdom of self, for just one more taste of that fleeting gratification. You become like a man lost in a vast, unforgiving desert, crawling on bruised knees, desperately begging for mere drops of validation, while she, often without malice, stands over you, holding the very water, the very source of internal strength that you once had the inherent power to create and sustain for yourself. You might think this is an exaggeration, a dramatic flourish, but look around you with open, honest eyes. Observe the world, observe history, observe the lives of men you know. How many men betray the sacred trust of their families, their commitments, their integrity, for the fleeting touch of a stranger, for the intoxicating allure of a new conquest? How many men have systematically destroyed hard-won empires, be they financial, professional, or personal, all for the hollow approval of a woman who, in her heart, may not even truly respect the man who so readily abandons his principles for her? How many men, tragically, reach a point of such profound despair that they end their own lives because a woman left, because the source of their externalized validation was suddenly removed? What greater, more devastating proof do you need that many are indeed ruled by the lowest, most undisciplined part of themselves, by an appetite that has usurped the throne of reason? And here, hidden in plain sight within Shi Heng's timeless wisdom, lies one of his greatest and most urgent warnings. No man is truly free who is not first master of himself. If you have not conquered your own appetites, if you have not tamed your incessant cravings for external validation, If you have not brought your desires under the firm and discerning rule of your reason, then you are not and can never be truly free. It matters not how much money you accumulate, how many followers you gather on social media, or how many women you manage to attract. If they can shatter your composure with a glance, if they can manipulate your decisions with a well-timed tear, if they can derail your life's purpose with the withdrawal of their affection, you are still, fundamentally, a prisoner, albeit one in a gilded cage of your own making. This isn't merely a personal tragedy. Shi Heng, in his work laws, argued that the downfall of an entire city, a civilization, often begins when its men allow the pursuit of pleasure to rule over the necessity of discipline. And what is modern society in many respects, if not a vast graveyard filled with the casualties of men who have willingly sacrificed their innate strength, their potential for greatness, upon the glittering altar of feminine approval? You see it reflected in every sphere. Men in positions of power, bowing, apologizing and submitting not to truth, not to unshakable principle, but to the pervasive fear of losing her favor, her validation, her perceived acceptance. It is crucial to understand that Shi Heng never taught men to hate or resent women. His profound teachings were aimed at something far more transformative. He taught men to see clearly, to strip away the veils of illusion and confront reality as it is, not as they wish it to be. In this clear light, the woman is not your enemy. She is not the villain in your story. Instead, she often acts as a powerful, unavoidable reflection of your own ungoverned soul, a mirror showing you the parts of yourself that remain undisciplined, unexamined, and unmastered. She plays the game, if a game is indeed being played, largely because you, perhaps unconsciously, invited her to the table, blind to your own vulnerabilities, desperate for external affirmation, and utterly unprepared for the psychological dynamics at play. But the game is not fixed. You can flip the board. You possess the inherent capacity to rise from the shadows of the cave, to break the chains of your own illusions, and to reclaim the long-abandoned throne of your own mind. This ascent, however, is not for the faint of heart. It demands that you dare to face what most men fear more than anything else, the unvarnished, often uncomfortable truth about themselves. It requires looking into that mirror she represents and acknowledging the undisciplined appetites, the fragile ego, the desperate need for external validation that she so effortlessly reflects. When you finally muster the courage to face that reflection, not with blame or bitterness, but with a resolute commitment to self-mastery, you begin to stand not as a beggar pleading for scraps of affection, not as a slave yoked to your desires, but as a man who governs himself first and foremost. And the man who truly rules himself, who has cultivated inner sovereignty, cannot be easily played, cannot be emotionally manipulated, and will not forever fall for the same old games, because he has transcended the need to participate in them, having mastered the most important player of all, the one residing within. This is the path to true freedom, the journey Shi Heng beckoned us towards, a journey from shadow to light, from servitude to sovereignty. So, you've begun to make that pivotal shift, to see her not as an ethereal goddess to be blindly worshipped, nor as a calculating demon to be feared, but as a mirror, a clear, sometimes painfully accurate reflection of the true state of your own inner kingdom. This realization is a monumental step on the path to self-awareness. But the profound wisdom of Shi Heng does not permit us to stop at mere recognition. It actively impels us towards profound and lasting transformation. Let us speak then with unflinching honesty about the tests that women so often and with such uncanny instinct present to men. Many men react to these perceived tests with a cascade of negative emotions, simmering frustration, outright anger, or a desperate, scrambling attempt to pass at any cost, frequently sacrificing their own deeply held integrity and principles in the frantic process. They interpret these tests as arbitrary and unfair hurdles, as confusing or even malicious games designed to belittle their efforts or expose their vulnerabilities. However, When viewed through the discerning lens of Shi Heng philosophy, these encounters transform from malicious traps into invaluable crucibles. They are not designed to inflict pain, but rather, often unconsciously on her part, to reveal the inherent strength or the glaring pre-existing weakness that already resides deep within the fabric of your being. She is not the originator or the fundamental cause of your potential collapse when faced with such a test. Rather, she acts as a catalyst, an agent that brings your own internal, often hidden fault lines surging to the surface. Recall Shi Heng's powerful assertion, a sentiment that echoes through dialogues like Gorgias. It is far, far better to suffer an injustice than to commit one. And why is this so? Because the man who readily commits an injustice, who casually compromises his foundational principles, who consistently acts out of unbridled, unexamined appetite, proves beyond any shadow of a doubt that he possesses no true mastery over his own desires, no firm governance over his own soul. There is an exquisite, often painfully sharp irony at play here that most men tragically never fully grasp. When you find yourself chasing a woman in a manner that forces you to compromise your core values, when you betray your life's sacred mission for the fleeting intoxication of her approval, when you debase yourself by begging and pleading for her validation, you are not by any stretch of the imagination engaged in a noble or heroic act of love. You are, in stark reality, committing a profound and damaging injustice against the very essence of your own soul. Each test she consciously or unconsciously presents is therefore a critical opportunity. Will you stand firm and uphold the unwavering integrity of your own being? Or will you crumble under pressure, revealing to yourself and to the world that your foundation was precariously built on shifting sand all along? Shi Heng possessed an understanding so sharp it could pierce through layers of societal conditioning that society itself is frequently constructed upon a bedrock of carefully curated narratives, on pervasive and often unquestioned myths. These myths are specifically designed, whether by intention or by emergent cultural evolution, to keep individuals largely obedient, their behaviors predictable, and their aspirations aligned with the prevailing systemic norms. And nowhere is this mechanism more insidiously effective, more subtly controlling, than in the romantic narratives that men, often from their most impressionable early years, are relentlessly fed about women, love, and the supposed path to fulfillment. You've been systematically conditioned by stories, songs, films, and cultural osmosis to believe that she is your better half, the missing essential piece of a puzzle that, once found, will finally make you feel whole and complete. You've been told in countless romanticized portrayals that she completes you, that she alone holds the elusive magical keys to your ultimate happiness, your profound contentment, and your life's overarching fulfillment. This is the grand, intoxicating, and dangerously misleading script that keeps so many men perpetually running on a hamster wheel of external seeking, forever chasing a phantom of completeness that they believe lies outside of themselves. But Shi Heng, with his commitment to unvarnished truth, knew better. In seminal works like The Republic, he makes it abundantly and uncomfortably clear that the masses, those content to reside within the dimly lit comfort of the cave, are often ruled not by genuine truth or enlightened reason, but by those individuals who are most skilled in the seductive art of persuasive flattery, by those who can spin the most appealing, most comforting, and most emotionally resonant illusions. The tragic and profound irony is that most men never undertake the arduous inner work required to graduate to become true rulers of their own minds, thereby never developing the critical capacity to discern these manipulative illusions from authentic wisdom. Instead, they passively internalize the societal script, coming to believe with absolute conviction that their ultimate purpose, their highest calling, lies in finding this external source of completion, this mythical other, who will magically solve all their inner deficiencies. In stark contrast, Shi Heng taught that the greatest and most stable harmony a man can achieve is to rule himself with unwavering reason, to meticulously align his actions with enduring objective truth, not with the deceptive siren song of momentary temptation or the immense pressure of societal expectation. Yet, Observe with critical awareness how society actively, often aggressively, programs you to betray this fundamental law of self-sovereignty. You're relentlessly encouraged to fight for her, to never give up on love, even when that so-called love is clearly a toxic obsession or a one-sided fantasy. To prove you're a real man by sacrificing everything, your most cherished principles, your hard-won ambitions, the very integrity of yourself, upon the altar of her approval. This is the subtle, yet profoundly disempowering slavery of the unexamined script, and Shi Heng's philosophy offers the only true and lasting path to liberation. The rigorous, often solitary and consistently challenging work of forging your own completeness from within the unshakable fortress of your own well-cultivated soul. A vast majority of men live their lives under the shadow of a perpetual, often low-grade, yet deeply pervasive terror. The fear of losing a woman's favor, the chilling fear of rejection, the desolate fear of being ultimately alone. This constellation of fears acts like an invisible yet incredibly effective fence, penning them into a restricted pasture of social conformity, emotional compromise, and a life lived on someone else's terms. But Shi Heng, in his profound wisdom, teaches you to redirect your fear towards something far more significant, far more existentially damaging to your essential being, the slow, insidious loss of your own soul, the gradual yet certain erosion of your character through countless small acts of self-betrayal. He writes, or rather his entire philosophical framework echoes the crucial sentiment that the soul inexorably takes on the character of the actions it habitually pursues. Pause and deeply contemplate the monumental implications of this statement. If you spend the precious currency of your life compulsively, almost addictively, chasing external validation from others, your soul inevitably becomes weak, pathetically dependent, and perpetually needy. If you elevate her attention, her approval, to the status of your highest, most coveted pursuit, your soul progressively shrinks, diminishing into something petty, something small, something utterly unworthy of the true greatness and profound purpose that potentially lies dormant within you. Let me articulate this with even more brutal, unflinching honesty. Every single instance where you consciously bend your core, non-negotiable values in a desperate attempt to keep her by your side. Every time you deliberately silence the clear, quiet voice of your inner truth simply to please her ears or avoid her displeasure. Every occasion where you willingly sacrifice your life's unique and sacred mission to cater to her fleeting emotions, her insecurities, or her demands. In all these moments, you are not engaging in an act of genuine love or noble sacrifice towards her. You are, in fact, committing an act of profound, often irreparable betrayal against yourself. And Shi Heng makes it unequivocally clear with the force of undeniable logic. This consistent betrayal of the self is the fertile, corrupted ground from which all injustice, all personal weakness, all societal decay, and all forms of tyranny ultimately spring. Why do despotic tyrants so often rise to power? Why do once great civilizations crumble from within, seemingly without external cause? It is because individual men, one by one, refuse the demanding responsibility of governing themselves. It is because they would rather serve the immediate, intoxicating gratification of fleeting pleasure than honor the enduring, often challenging demands of objective truth. It is because they would rather chase the comforting, familiar shadows within the cave than summon the courage to face the often blinding, transformative light of genuine self-knowledge. Women, whether through conscious strategy or deep intuitive instinct, frequently test men precisely to expose this fundamental, underlying weakness. She subtly pushes your established boundaries to ascertain if you possess the internal fortitude, the unshakable self-respect, to hold the line with calm resolve. She strategically withholds affection or approval to see if you will debase yourself, if you will beg and plead like a desperate supplicant. She pointedly challenges your most cherished convictions, your foundational beliefs, to discover if you will readily betray them, discard them like yesterday's news, just for the chance to keep her fleeting approval. And every single time you fold, every time you capitulate and surrender your integrity, she may offer you temporary solace or a brief reprieve from your fear, but deep down, in the unspoken chambers of her perception and, more importantly, within your own soul, a corrosive seed of disrespect is irrevocably sown. Because she knows, and far more critically, you should know, that a man who cannot consistently and effectively rule himself cannot be trusted to rule anything of true consequence, not his own life, not his future, not his potential legacy. The courage to squarely face her potential disapproval, to willingly risk being unwanted for the sacred sake of upholding your own integrity, is the very act that liberates you from the exhausting, soul-crushing game entirely. Shi Heng, in his vision of an ideal society, described the ultimate ruler not as a swashbuckling conqueror of vast lands or a commander of mighty armies, but as a philosopher king. This was not a monarch adorned with gold and jewels, but a man who had first and foremost achieved the arduous victory of mastering his own soul. He was a man whose unwavering allegiance was to unvarnished truth above all else, a man who remained steadfast and unshaken by the fickle, ever-changing opinions of the masses or the cunning, manipulative games played in the arenas of power and social influence. This profound ideal of the philosopher king is not merely a quaint historical concept reserved for those aspiring to lead nations or city-states. It is, in fact, the ultimate lifelong aspiration for every individual man who genuinely seeks true freedom, authentic personal power, and a life lived with purpose and integrity within his own personal domain. If you can learn to look into her eyes and see not a flawless goddess demanding your perpetual worship, nor a formidable enemy requiring strategic conquest, but simply a mirror reflecting with often startling accuracy your own inner state of being. If you can fully reclaim your inherent power, not through displays of anger, resentment, or bitter recrimination, but with calm, centered clarity and unwavering self-possession, then you begin to truly embody this noble archetype of the philosopher king within the sovereign territory of your own life. The man who genuinely and consistently rules himself cannot be truly or lastingly manipulated, because his core sense of self, his identity, his worth is not precariously contingent upon the shifting sands of external approval or validation. He cannot be emotionally destroyed or psychologically crippled by another's actions or words, because the wellspring of his peace, his resilience, his contentment flows from the deep, inexhaustible reservoir within. He cannot be perpetually played or drawn into cycles of emotional drama, because he has evolved beyond the adolescent need for the shallow victories, the fleeting validations, and the ego-driven power struggles that such games invariably offer. So, here is the profound and timeless challenge that Shi Heng lays before you, a challenge that has echoed across the corridors of human history, calling to men in every generation. Stop the futile and exhausting chase of the ephemeral shadow of her validation. Stop worshipping the romanticized, often completely unrealistic, illusion of her that you've painstakingly constructed within your own mind. Stop trading the pure, imperishable gold of your soul, your integrity, your purpose, for the temporary, often conditional affection she might choose to dole out. Stand up, not in defiance of her, but in allegiance to yourself. Look unflinchingly, with courageous honesty, into that mirror she represents. Face, acknowledge, and begin the work of mastering the uncultivated, undisciplined parts of yourself that you've been too cowardly, too distracted, or too conditioned to confront. And when you finally, resolutely commit to this often challenging path of radical self-honesty and disciplined self-rule, you will make a startling discovery. You will find that you no longer fear the games women or anyone might play, because you will have fundamentally outgrown the psychological and emotional need to participate in them at all. You will begin to operate from an entirely different plane of existence, a plane characterized by self-derived strength, unshakable inner purpose, and profound emotional freedom. This journey is not ultimately about winning her. It is about the far more significant victory of winning yourself. And in that singular internal victory lies a freedom, a power, and a peace that no external force, no other person can ever truly diminish or take away. We have spoken extensively about the myriad ways men inadvertently cede their power, often through unexamined desires and the pursuit of external validation. But let us now turn our attention to one of the most insidious, yet commonly accepted forms of self-sabotage, the tendency for men to lay their own authentic truth, their genuine convictions, and even their core sense of self upon the volatile altar of a woman's emotions. In the relentless, often desperate, quest for harmony, or what is mistakenly perceived as such, countless men learn to meticulously navigate the minefield of her potential displeasure. They become expert self-censors, carefully weighing their words, not for their veracity or importance, but for their likelihood of eliciting a calm, or at least not overtly negative, emotional response from her. They suppress their own legitimate needs, downplay their deeply held beliefs, and contort their authentic reactions, all in an effort to maintain a fragile, superficial tranquility. This is often done under the noble-sounding guise of keeping the peace, not rocking the boat, or being a supportive partner. But Shi Heng, with his unwavering commitment to the primacy of truth and the integrity of the individual soul, would cut through such self-deceptive justifications with surgical precision. He would reveal that this constant, almost habitual deference to her emotional state, when it comes at the expense of your own authentic expression, is not an act of enlightened peacekeeping, but a slow, agonizing form of spiritual suicide. Each time you swallow your truth to avoid her anger, each instance where you betray your own better judgment to appease her insecurity, each moment you feign agreement with something that internally repulses you simply to gain her temporary approval, you are not building a stronger connection. You are meticulously chipping away at the very foundation of your own being. You are teaching her, and more importantly, teaching yourself, that your inner world, your thoughts, your principles are secondary, negotiable, and ultimately expendable. This counterfeit peace, purchased at the price of your own authenticity, is no peace at all. It is a silent, festering resentment, a growing chasm of unspoken truths that will inevitably corrode the relationship from within and, more tragically, erode your own self-respect and capacity for genuine, powerful self-expression. The man who constantly walks on eggshells around a woman's emotions is not a master of diplomacy. He is a prisoner in a cage of his own anxious construction, a servant to a master whose whims he can never fully predict or satisfy, because the true master he has abandoned is the unwavering voice of reason and integrity within himself. The modern world, with its relentless bombardment of romanticized imagery and its celebration of fleeting, intense emotional highs, often equates the dizzying, intoxicating rush of infatuation with the profound, enduring substance of love. Men are conditioned to chase that initial spark, that electrifying chemistry, that all-consuming obsession, believing it to be the hallmark of a true connection. This pursuit, as Shi Heng would surely point out, is almost entirely driven by the untamed, appetitive part of the soul, the wild horse of desire that, if left unchecked, gallops headlong towards immediate gratification, often with little regard for long-term consequences or deeper values. Infatuation is a powerful, often beautiful experience, but it is, by its very nature, ephemeral. It is a firework display, dazzling, breathtaking, but ultimately short-lived, leaving behind only smoke and the memory of a fleeting brilliance. Shi Heng's philosophy, however, guides us towards a far more stable, far more meaningful, and ultimately far more fulfilling pursuit. The quest not merely for her fleeting infatuation, but for her deep, unwavering, and genuinely earned respect. While infatuation can be ignited by superficial qualities, physical attractiveness, charm, wit, or even the projection of an idealized fantasy, true respect is forged in the crucible of character. it is built upon a foundation of unwavering integrity, consistent adherence to one's principles, demonstrated courage in the face of adversity, and a steadfast commitment to a purpose larger than oneself. A woman might be momentarily captivated by your charm, but she will only truly respect the man who respects himself enough to live by his own code, even when it is difficult, even when it doesn't align with her immediate desires, and especially when it means standing firm in his truth. This kind of respect is not given lightly, nor can it be demanded or manipulated into existence. It must be earned day by day through consistent action and unwavering character. The man who dedicates himself to becoming a man worthy of such profound respect, rather than merely chasing the fleeting high of infatuation, is building his relational life on solid rock, not on shifting sand. He understands that while attraction may open the door, it is respect that keeps the relationship grounded, allows it to weather storms, and provides the fertile soil for genuine, lasting love to take root and flourish. This is not to denigrate attraction, but to place it in its proper context, as a component, not the entirety, of a connection that has true depth and enduring power. Every significant relationship we cultivate, every individual we allow to occupy a central place in our lives, contributes to the unseen architecture of our existence. They can act as sturdy, load-bearing pillars, reinforcing our foundations, supporting our aspirations, and helping us reach greater heights. Or conversely, they can function, often subtly and over time, as agents of erosion, slowly undermining our structures, weakening our resolve, and diverting us from our true path. Shi Heng, with his emphasis on a life lived in accordance with reason and purpose, would implore every man to step back and conduct a rigorous, unflinchingly honest audit of the impact his relationships with women, both past and present, individual and collective, have had and are currently having on the overall trajectory of his life. This is not an exercise in blame or recrimination, but a crucial act of self-awareness and responsible stewardship of one's own destiny. Ask yourself with the dispassionate clarity of a philosopher examining a complex system, does your pursuit of or entanglement with a particular woman or the general pattern of your interactions with women align with your deepest values and your most important life goals? Is she or are they a source of genuine inspiration, encouragement, and strength, propelling you forward on your mission? Or does the dynamic drain your energy, distract your focus, compromise your principles, and lead you down paths of lesser resistance and diminished ambition? Does the relationship foster growth, mutual respect, and the pursuit of individual and shared excellence, or does it breed dependency, resentment, and a subtle stagnation of your potential? These are not comfortable questions, and the answers may be even less so. But to shy away from them is to navigate your life with a blindfold on, blissfully unaware of whether the currents you are embracing are carrying you towards your desired harbor or inexorably towards treacherous shoals. A man who is truly committed to building a life of substance, purpose, and integrity, as Shi Heng advocated, must be willing to make difficult choices, to prune away relationships that are fundamentally misaligned with his core being, no matter how superficially alluring or emotionally comfortable they may seem. For the architecture of a well-lived life is not built by accident. It is the result of conscious design, courageous choices, and an unwavering commitment